Hi everyone, I'm Gary Null. Today, a brief commentary on a news article that just came out this week saying that if you took melatonin, a very popular sleeping aid, that you had a really high risk of dying prematurely from heart disease of different types. Here's the problem. Every so often, maybe once or twice a year, some statement comes out in the mass media covered by all the different platforms, newspapers, television, radio. The last one I challenged about vitamin C causing cancer. First thing I did is I called the scientist that was allegedly to have made that statement, and he said, never made that. They took completely out of context. Well, I knew that was the correct answer because of all the studies that I have done and all the clinical work with tens of thousands of people showing vitamin C actually reverses disease. But in any case, I told my audience that that was false information. Well, I'm going to do the same today. Anytime I see something that challenges something that we've been using, and there's so many good studies on, hundreds and hundreds of studies on melatonin, then how suddenly did we have this one pop up? So the first thing you do is you call Dr. Scott Vogel. Scott is quite simply one of the finest research scientists in the United States. I brought it to his attention. I'm going to share many of his insights. But then I look at who funded the study, and a big red flag shows up. None of their financial potential conflicts of interest. So how do I know the real background on someone and whether or not they had anything influencing doing a study? Then I look at the quality of the study. And I would never have published this study had it come to a journal I was associated with. So here is what we have to do. First, everyone is kind of freaking out because this observational study is entitled The Effects of Long-Term Melatonin Supplementation on the Incidence of Heart Failure in Patients with Insomnia. And it was released just this week. And what it's saying is that it's saying there's an association, however, not causation. Immediately that should tell you that not to trust this without challenge, between melatonin and heart failure diagnosis. And so here is what we have come to agree on, Scott and myself and others, that we do not agree with these conclusions. The study contains several glaring methodological limitations, and its findings are inconsistent with multiple higher quality long-term studies demonstrating that melatonin actually supports cardiovascular health. The study is in opposition to higher quality RTC studies and longer observational studies. Let me go through some of what we have determined. It is in opposition to the results from higher quality randomized controlled studies which showed that melatonin improved ejection fraction. That means the amount of blood in the left ventricle pump that pumps out with each heartbeat. It improves quality of life. It improves sleep quality and flow-mediated dilation. That's a measure of the endothelial health, while decreasing fatigue and decreasing the heart failure marker, known as NT-proBNP. Now, here are some studies, observational studies, that refute the findings of the study in question. An analysis of 3 prospective observational studies involving 159,000 individuals and up to 23 years follow-up found no association between melatonin use and cardiovascular disease. In fact, melatonin use appeared to attenuate the increased risk of cardiovascular disease found in long-term night shift workers, meaning if you work night shift, and in and of itself for 10 years or longer, you've taken a lot of years off your lifespan. And because you're decreasing the natural release of melatonin from the pineal gland in the brain, which you need. That's why you need a dark room, a quiet room, and 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. Also, an observational study of 16 years duration with 29,000 individuals found that a higher dietary intake of melatonin was associated with a decreased total death and cardiovascular death. An observational study of 9,386 veterans admitted to the hospital with sepsis found that those exposed to melatonin within the first day of hospitalization had a lower in-hospital and 30-day death rate. Animal studies, mechanistic studies, and smaller studies also consistently highlight the cardioprotective properties of melatonin, and all the expert opinions is favorable on the potential of melatonin for cardio health. Now, this is demonstrated by the following publications. Melatonin as an adjunct therapy in cardiovascular disease management. That was 2024. The effects of melatonin on cardiovascular risk factors and metabolic syndrome, that's diabetes. That's a comprehensive review in 2020. Melatonin is a therapeutic agent for alleviating endothelial dysfunction in cardiovascular disease. Mind you, the emphasis was on oxidative stress. That was 2023. Cardioprotective melatonin, translating from proof of concept studies to therapeutic use. It was in 2019. Clinical application of melatonin in the treatment of cardiovascular disease. Current evidence and new insights into cardioprotective and cardiotherapeutic properties. That was in 2020. So those are all high-quality studies published in peer-reviewed journals. I'm just giving you the references now, but it shows you there's a huge amount of scientific data showing just the opposite of what they said. So what happened then? That's where I used to teach a course entitled Research Methodology, showing medical doctors and scientists, how do you actually interpret what's in a study? How do you know it's objective? How do you know that the peer reviewers were awake at the wheel? And so there are inherent flaws that I found, and Dr. Stock-Vogel found. The alleged correlation between long-term melatonin use and heart failure risk clearly rests on weak causal reasoning and methodological limitations. I'll give you examples. The study's analysis of TriNeXT database is based upon retrospective electronic health record data. As such, it cannot confirm whether patients actually took melatonin or for how long, only that a prescription was recorded. The melatonin group included only patients with prescription records. Well, hold on a second. That excludes millions of over-the-counter or people walking into a health food store ordering online users, many of whom may have been classified as controls. This creates substantial exposure of misclassification bias. Some of the prescriptions may never have taken melatonin, while many without prescriptions likely used over-the-counter melatonin. This limitation is particularly relevant in the United States, where melatonin is widely purchased outside of clinical systems. Moreover, individuals prescribed melatonin from chronic insomnia differ from controls in comorbidity burden and sleep disturbance severity and psychiatric profiles. Let's just say you have a psychiatric profile and you're taking medications that the medications themselves prevent a deep, restful sleep. So you're given melatonin. You're not taking into account all these other risk factors for heart failure. That's just sloppiness. Even the study's authors acknowledged this, but this wasn't in any newspaper or magazine. Quote, since melatonin use in the study was based only on those identified from medication entries in the electronic health record, everyone taking it as an over-the-counter supplement in the United States or other countries that don't require prescription would have been in the non-melatonin group. Therefore, the analysis may not accurately reflect this, end quote. Their words, not mine. Why didn't the media, the health reporters, do a little homework? The large relative risks, 90% increase in heart failure, 3.5-fold hospitalization risk, are implausibly high for a hormone with known antioxidant and cardioprotective mechanisms in experimental studies, strongly suggesting residual confounding error of variance in results that remains when a co-confounder has not been adequately adjusted for. The study design undermines meaningful interpretation. The inclusion of international data without accounting for differences in prescription rules or melatonin formulations mixes dissimilar patent populations, and then as a result, patient outcomes. Hospitalization outcomes appear based upon non-specific codes that may exaggerate associations. No data on biochemical validation, on melatonin levels, on dosages, or adherence were provided. None, preventing any insightful underlying mechanisms. Peer-reviewed meta-analysis to date report either neutral or protective beneficial cardiovascular effects of physiological melatonin use. The study uses statistical manipulation to generate alarmist headlines. And this is what the study statistics actually say. When prescription records were reviewed, those with melatonin prescriptions had a 4.6% chance of being diagnosed with heart failure versus 2.7% for controls. This is a difference of 1.9%. That's it. Instead of using absolute risk above, press releases will often use what is termed relative risk because it sounds more dramatic. Relative risk is calculated by comparing the 2.7% risk in controls with the 4.6% risk in those with melatonin prescriptions. Well, if you're taking a melatonin prescription, what are the conditions you have? How many other drugs are you taking? Were any of those other drugs causing insomnia? Were any of those other drugs causing high blood pressure, increased risk of stroke or heart attacks? Probably yes. Giving, quote, a 90% higher chance of heart failure in those with melatonin prescriptions than those without. However, in reality, it is only 1.9% greater risk overall, and that is significant to no one. That absolute increased risk of only 1.9% is underwhelming association and can be caused by many other confounding factors. The study's conclusions are suspiciously biased, given the authors admit the study does not prove cause and effect. That's what they didn't tell you. The study appears to be an attempt to question melatonin's long history of safety. Why? It could be, as a speculation, intentionally inflammatory statements to generate sensational headlines by overhyping the data when it was only a retrospective analysis incapable of proving any effect. Further, and very concerning, is that multiple authors of the study refused to disclose financial conflicts of interest, including the study's lead author. Question: what are they hiding by not disclosing this important information expected for any scientific study? The lead author admitted there were significant flaws which he highlighted. Quote, worst insomnia, depression, anxiety, or the use of other sleep-enhancing medicines might be linked to both melatonin use and heart risk, end quote. You heard me correctly. So think of the things you take that could, as a side effect, impact your heart. You see it all the time. Increased risk of death, increased risk of stroke. Well, what if those other people who were taking melatonin were also taking those? That was not included. Let me explain this again. This is the lead author. Quote, worse insomnia, depression, and anxiety. Okay, how many people taking medications for depression and anxiety have an increased risk of suicide or death? All of them. Quote, or the use of other sleep-enhancing medications might be linked to both melatonin use and heart risk, end quote. The lead author also emphasized, quote, our study cannot prove a direct cause and effect relationship. Let me repeat that. For all the newspapers, all the magazines, all the people on television, why did you leave this out? This is the lead author. Quote, our study cannot prove a direct cause and effect relationship. Well, then this should be retracted and get people who know what they're doing, who have a background in nutritional sciences, to come forward. But I shouldn't be the only person in the media today that I'm aware of that is showing you why this should be challenged. But I've been doing this my whole career. Nothing new. Hopefully this helps you. And for those of you who've been using this without freaking out and flooding my office, what do we do? What do we do? Look for the truth before you do anything. All right? Share this with others who have concern. Thank you for watching. For those of you who are listening to my radio show in New York City, we're going to take a break and come right back. For those of you who are watching this on Gary Null YouTube, there's a whole lot more out there to take a look at. I have hundreds upon hundreds of classrooms on the air, health and nutrition, all there free as a public service for you. Otherwise, back in a moment. Please stay with us.